It begins in silence. A man sits before a window streaked with rain, the night beyond him trembling with distant city lights. His hand rests on an old wooden table, fingers tracing the grain as though it were a map of forgotten truths. Somewhere a clock ticks, slow, deliberate, ancient. He takes a breath and whispers, "Is this all there is?" Outside, thunder rolls across the horizon like a question from God. The world feels asleep, not in peace but in ignorance. Yet in the stillness between raindrops something stirs, a pulse, a tremor, the echo of an awakening mind. Because some men and women do wake up. They see through the veil, not the illusions of politics or money, but the deeper one, the illusion of the self. And once they see it, there is no turning back. This is what spiritually awake people see, what others cannot. It begins with a strange kind of homesickness. Not for a place, but for a feeling, a lost familiarity with existence itself. Those who start to awaken describe it not as a discovery, but a remembering. Something deep beneath the noise begins to stir, whispering, "You were never separate. You were never alone." The man in the city may feel it as a sudden stillness in traffic. The woman at her desk may feel it when the hum of the computer falls away and she hears her own breathing. Steady, ancient. For a fleeting second, the machinery of life pauses, and they realize, I am the witness, not the storm. Alan Watts once compared the universe to a game of hide and seek. The divine, he said, hides from itself by becoming everything. The stars, the rivers, the people rushing to work, the tears, the laughter. It disguises itself as you and me. And the goal is not to win the game, but to play it beautifully. To laugh when you're found. To marvel at the miracle of forgetting. But most of humanity forgot that it was a game. We mistook our masks for our faces, our possessions for our worth, our fears for our identities. We learned to call this survival, this seriousness, this striving, real life. In a small mountain village in Tibet, there's a story told about a monk who meditated for 30 years seeking enlightenment. When he finally attained it, he returned to his village and was asked what he had learned. He smiled, lifted a cup of tea and said, "Before enlightenment I was thirsty. After enlightenment I still drink, but now I taste the tea." To the awake, even the smallest gesture glows with meaning. The rustle of leaves, the warmth of a hand, the sound of rain against the roof, all become sacred, because they are no longer seen as background noise to life. They are life. Watts would often pause mid-lecture, light a cigarette, and let silence fill the room. He wanted people to feel what he meant, that words are only ripples on the surface of something vast. Beneath them lies the ocean of pure being. In that silence, many realized they were not listening to a teacher. They were listening to themselves. To wake up is not to withdraw from the world, but to see it clearly, to understand that the dream is not evil, only incomplete. Like an actor who forgets he's in a play, humanity suffers not because the story is cruel, but because it believes it is real. And yet, how compassionate the dream becomes when one knows it is a dream. The anger of others softens, because you see that behind their fury lies fear. Behind fear lies confusion, and behind confusion lies the same divine longing that burns in you. You begin to see through the roles. The beggar and the billionaire, the saint and the sinner, all parts of one grand cosmic performance. You stop judging and start witnessing. Life stops being a race and becomes a rhythm. In one of his lectures, Watts said, "You are something the whole universe is doing. In the same way that a wave is something the whole ocean is doing. This is not poetry, and it is physics of the soul. You are not in the world. You are the world. Every breath, every heartbeat, every fleeting emotion is the cosmos expressing itself through your form. And once this truth begins to dawn, the machinery of the dream starts to slow. The colors sharpen, the sounds deepen. You begin to feel the texture of existence, raw, vast, unfiltered. For the first time, you are not trying to get anywhere. You are simply here, but awakening is not peace, and not yet. Because once you see through the illusion, the next question rises like thunder. If all is one, then who am I? The question echoes through every awakened heart. Who am I? It is not asked from curiosity anymore, but from necessity. A trembling inquiry that rises when the familiar sense of me begins to dissolve. For centuries, philosophers, mystics, and poets have whispered the same answer in different tongues. You are not who you think you are. But these words only become real when the dream begins to unravel. Imagine standing on a shoreline at dusk. The sea is calm, the air heavy with salt and wind. You look at the horizon and feel the strange intuition that what you're staring at is not out there. The waves, the sky, the fading sun, they are you, wearing the costume of distance. You are both the eye and the light that enters it. This is the first tremor of awakening, when the boundary between observer and observed starts to blur. For some it happens through meditation, for others through heartbreak or loss. The dream cracks open and for an instant the self vanishes. What remains is not emptiness but fullness, an infinite awareness, vast and still. Alan Watts once said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. It's impossible because the thing doing the defining, the mind, is part of the illusion." The self that says, "I must find myself," is the same self that's hiding from the truth. The spiritually awake begin to see this paradox everywhere. They notice that every attempt to control life only tightens the chains. Every desire for certainty breeds confusion. Every chase for happiness ends in exhaustion. The harder you try to awaken, the deeper you dream. That's why the great teachers speak of surrender, not conquest. Enlightenment is not achieved. It is allowed. Like the surface of a pond, it clears when the ripples stop. There is a story of a man who traveled across India searching for truth. After years of fasting, praying, and studying, he found a hermit sitting beneath a banyan tree. The traveler bowed and said, "Master, how do I find God?" The hermit smiled and said, "You can't find what was never lost." That answer haunted the traveler. He realized that all his striving was built on the assumption that he was separate from what he sought. The very search had become the veil. This realization that separation itself is the illusion shatters the foundation of ordinary identity. It feels like death because in a way it is. The ego trembles, the mind resists. Who am I if not my story? My pain? My ambition? The dream begins to fight for its survival. It whispers, "Don't let go. You'll disappear." But the awakened know. The one who disappears was never real to begin with. In that surrender, in the moment when all clinging ceases, life reveals its secret. You are not a fragment of the universe lost in chaos. You are the universe momentarily pretending to be human. You are the eye through which it looks back at itself, the breath through which it feels its own rhythm. This understanding is not reached through belief, but through seeing, direct, unfiltered seeing. It cannot be proven or taught. It must be lived, felt, breathed. When the Buddha was asked who he was, he answered simply, "I am awake." Not enlightened, not holy, just awake. Because awakening is not about becoming something new. It is about remembering what has always been. And once you glimpse that, even for a heartbeat, the world changes. The dream doesn't end, it transforms. The noise becomes music, the struggle becomes dance. Every face becomes your own reflection. Every moment becomes sacred, but the journey has only begun. For as the illusion of separation fades, a deeper revelation emerges, one that will challenge everything you thought you knew about life and death. The dream of the world has started to dissolve. But what lies beyond the dream? Long before the modern world, before cities glittered and clocks divided eternity into hours, humanity moved with the rhythm of the earth. The first people did not think of themselves as separate from the forest, the sky, or the sea. The rain was not weather, it was blessing. The wind was not air, it was spirit. But something happened. Slowly, imperceptibly, consciousness turned inward and began to call itself I. Alan Watts often said that this was both the rise and the tragedy of mankind. The birth of self-awareness gave us art, love, and reflection, but it also gave us the wound of separation. We began to see ourselves as strangers in a world that once felt like home. The first fall was not from paradise. It was into identity. The hunter who once danced with the animals began to see them as prey. The farmer who once sang to the soil began to measure it in yield. The priest who once worshipped the mystery began to codify it into words. Slowly, life became a hierarchy instead of a harmony. The myth of Eden speaks to this shift. The forbidden fruit was not sin, it was self-consciousness. In tasting it, humanity began to judge, compare, and fear. We saw good and evil, right and wrong, me and you. The tree of knowledge did not curse us, and it awakened the voice in our heads that would never be silent again. Watts wrote, We are living in a culture entirely hypnotized by the illusion of time, in which the so-called present moment is felt as nothing but an infinitesimal hairline between an all-powerfully causative past and an absorbingly important future. And in that hypnosis, the present, the only place life ever truly exists, became invisible. The world, once alive and immediate, became a backdrop for the drama of the self. We invented stories to explain our loneliness, religions, nations, philosophies, economies, all rooted in the idea that there is something out there we must reach, fix, or control. But the deeper tragedy is that none of these masks are lies. They are half-truths. Identity was necessary for the play to continue. Without it, there would be no love story, no discovery, no art. The divine had to pretend to be lost, or the game would have no meaning. And yet, every step we took toward progress also deepened the illusion. We built cities but forgot the stars. We mastered machines but lost mastery of the mind. We conquered distance but grew distant from ourselves. The spiritually awake see this not as condemnation but as compassion. They understand that the ego is not evil. It is simply frightened. Like a child building a sandcastle, it clings to its creations, terrified the tide will wash them away. But the tide always comes. You can feel this fear in the hum of civilization, in the restless scrolling, the endless noise, the constant need to prove that we exist. It is the echo of that first fall, the trembling of beings who forgot they were infinite. Somewhere a man sits alone in a dark apartment, staring at the glow of his phone. He scrolls past lives brighter than his own, faces smiling, bodies perfect, worlds he will never enter. A quiet despair settles in. He doesn't know that what he envies is not their lives, but their illusion of meaning. He doesn't know that beneath it all, they are searching too, each person trying to return to something they cannot name. The dream of separation becomes the theater of modern life. And within it, every soul carries the same secret ache. I have forgotten who I am. The tragedy of identity is that it promises security but delivers suffering. We cling to our names, our beliefs, our possessions, as if holding tightly enough could stop the impermanence of existence. But the more we define ourselves, the smaller our world becomes. Alan Watts once said, "The more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless." Yet we build our lives upon permanence, careers, reputations, nations, religions. We carve our identities into stone and call it truth, all the while forgetting that life itself is water, moving, changing, dancing between forms. This fear of change is the heartbeat of the ego. It whispers, you must survive, you must matter, you must win. And so humanity began to chase immortality, not through wisdom but through memory. Monuments, scriptures, dynasties, and all attempts to defy time. But in trying to escape death, we killed the joy of living. You can see this fall written across history. In the ancient temples of Mesopotamia, kings inscribed their names into bricks so that they might be remembered forever. In the streets of Rome, statues of emperors rose like defiant prayers against oblivion. In the cathedrals of Europe, man crowned himself the steward of God's creation, while forgetting that he was creation. The ego's hunger was infinite because it was built on illusion. It is a mask that cannot exist without attention, a story that feeds on belief. To keep it alive, we created mirrors everywhere. Wealth, fame, ideology, anything that could reflect back the image of me. But in every mirror, there is also distortion. A mother sacrifices her peace to be a good parent. A man loses his soul to become a successful leader. A nation wages war to prove it is great. Each act justified by identity, when in each act, moving us further from wholeness. In one of his lectures, Watts described this beautifully. The ego is nothing other than the focus of conscious attention. It's not an enemy, but a spotlight, one that forgets the vast theater it illuminates. We live so long inside that beam that we mistake it for the entire stage. But there are moments when the spotlight flickers. A heartbreak, a loss, a failure. These are not punishments, but cracks in the illusion. When the masks shatter, when the roles collapse, the self trembles. The man who loses everything begins to see what he never lost. There was once a Japanese samurai who approached a Zen master, sword in hand, and asked, "Show me the difference between heaven and hell." The master sneered, "You call yourself a warrior? You are nothing but a coward." Enraged, the samurai drew his blade, his face red with fury. the master said softly. That is hell. The samurai froze. His eyes widened as he understood. He fell to his knees, tears filling them. The master smiled gently. And that, he said, is heaven. The ego lives in reaction. The spirit lives in awareness. To awaken, one must see the machinery of reaction, the endless cycle of defense and desire, and simply stop feeding it. But this stopping is terrifying because it feels like death. When you no longer defend who you think you are, what remains? Watts compared it to diving into deep water. At first you fight, you flail, until you realize the water itself is holding you. In that surrender, fear dissolves. You no longer swim against the current. You move with it. The spiritually awake are those who have drowned and found that they cannot die. They have let go of the surface self and discovered the ocean beneath. Yet for most, the fall continues. The ego, threatened by dissolution, builds higher walls. New identities, new dreams, new distractions. It invents progress as a way to avoid presence. And so the question grows darker. If identity is an illusion, why does it feel so real? Identity feels real because it hurts. Pain, fear, and desire. These are the threads that weave the mask to the skin. When the child first learns the word mine, a spark ignites. Possession becomes selfhood. The toy is not just a toy, it is me. When someone takes it away, it feels like a wound. That sensation never leaves, and it simply evolves into adult forms. A lover leaves and the ego bleeds. A stranger insults and the ego flares in rage. A dream collapses and the ego mourns as though it were dying. What the awakened eventually realize is that this pain is not punishment. It is the soul's alarm, ringing to remind you that what you cling to was never truly yours. Alan Watts once said, "We suffer because we take seriously what the gods made for fun." The tragedy of the human condition is that we forget we are playing. We confuse the costume for the actor, the character for the consciousness behind it. Life becomes heavy because we treat illusion as obligation. To awaken is not to deny the self, but to see through it, to recognize it as a story being told, not a prison to defend. But the ego is clever. Even spirituality can become its disguise. The man who once sought money now seeks enlightenment. The woman who once chased approval now chases peace. The desire to be someone simply changes shape, from worldly to divine. And yet, the center of the illusion remains, I must become. Watts warned of this trap. You can't get rid of the ego by trying to get rid of the ego. It will sneak up behind you and call itself your anti-ego. Every attempt to perfect ourselves assumes that we are broken, and thus reinforces the dream. Consider a candle trying to see itself without a mirror. It shines and shines, yet never realizes that its light was never missing. In the same way, the self searches for awakening through effort, unaware that effort itself is the veil. The fall into identity, then, is not a single event. It's a spiral. Humanity keeps forgetting and remembering, losing and finding, awakening and sleeping again. It's the heartbeat of existence. The divine does not fall once. It falls in every birth, every ego, every story told under the sun. And perhaps that is the secret beauty of it all. Because without the fall, there would be no return. Without the illusion of being me, there could be no wonder in rediscovering the infinite we. In a monastery high in the Himalayas, a monk once asked his master, "When does the self finally disappear?" The old man laughed and replied, "When you stop looking for it." That laughter carries the essence of all awakening. The fall into identity was never a mistake, and it was a movement of divine curiosity. The universe, infinite and whole, desired to experience itself from the inside, so it became the human being, and fragile, fearful, and searching. It's as if the ocean decided to forget it was water, just to know the joy of finding itself again in a single drop. To be human, then, is both tragedy and triumph. Tragedy because we forget, triumph because we can remember. And those who awaken do not rise above humanity. They fall back into it with open eyes. They see the divine even in confusion, the sacred even in suffering. For them, every lost soul is God pretending to be lost. Every argument is eternity talking to itself. Every cry is the voice of the whole longing to remember. The spiritually awake do not escape the dream. They see through it. And in that vision, even the fall becomes grace. But what happens when the mask shatters completely, when identity collapses, and there is no longer a me to hold on to. That is where the true awakening begins. It begins quietly, not with thunder, not with fire, but with the smallest crack in the mirror of the self. One morning, a man wakes and feels the world differently. The air tastes sharper. The hum of the refrigerator, the flicker of light on the wall, even the silence between his thoughts, all of it hums with presence. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has. This is the beginning of the end, the breaking of the spell. Alan Watts described this moment as the collapse of the illusion of separateness. It rarely arrives in peace. The mind, accustomed to control, suddenly finds the floor dissolving beneath it. The self, that carefully built structure of memories, hopes, and fears, begins to crumble. The experience is terrifying. It feels like dying because, in a way, it is. Imagine standing before a mirror that suddenly stops reflecting you. You wave your hand, nothing. You speak in silence. The image you once believed to be you has vanished. For the spiritually awake, this moment is both horror and liberation. The realization that what they thought was real was only glass, reflecting nothing. Watt said, "When you find out that there was never anything in the mirror but light itself, you stop being afraid of your own reflection. But to reach that freedom, the mirror must first shatter. It often begins with loss. A relationship ends, a dream collapses, an identity dies. You watch your story fall apart, and with it, the meaning that held your life together. Grief sweeps through like a storm, tearing down every certainty. You cry out for rescue, but none comes. Then, in the stillness that follows the destruction, a strange awareness rises. The pain is still there, but the one who feels it seems transparent. You realize the emotion moves through you, not as yours, but as something happening. You begin to notice thoughts the same way, like birds flying across the sky of your mind. You used to chase them, to claim them, to fear them. Now you simply watch. They come, they go. None belong to you. The great mirror has cracked, and through the fracture, light pours in. Watts compared awakening to music. You do not understand music by counting the notes, but by allowing it to flow. The ego tries to analyze. The awakened begin to listen. The shattering of the mirror teaches one thing, that control is an illusion, and surrender is truth. There was once a letter written by a monk who had just experienced what Zen calls kensho, the first glimpse of enlightenment. He wrote, "The river is flowing, the mountains are walking. My heart laughs, for the world is no longer made of things, it is made of motion. I searched for myself, but only the wind answered. That wind is the voice of awakening. It whispers that you were never the reflection, never the story, never the image you defended with such devotion. But hearing that whisper is not the same as accepting it. For when the mirror breaks, most people try to glue the pieces back together. They rush to rebuild meaning, to return to the safety of the known. They tell themselves, I just need to fix this and everything will be fine. Yet every attempt to repair the illusion only sharpens the shards. Until finally, an exhausted, cut and bleeding, the self surrenders. And in that surrender, something miraculous happens. You realize you were never trapped in the mirror. You are the light shining through it. The fear of death fades. The anxiety of becoming dissolves. What remains is awareness, certain, boundless, unbreakable. But awakening does not end here. Because once you've seen the illusion collapse, a deeper mystery emerges. If there is no me, then who is living this life? After the shattering, there is silence. Not the silence of absence, but of presence, vast, luminous, alive. The mind once full of chatter becomes an empty cathedral. The echoes of thought still appear, but they no longer dominate the space. There is no thinker behind them, no central witness holding the scene together. There is only awareness, fluid, open, infinite. This is the moment the mystics called the death before death. Alan Watts said, "The real you is not a puppet which life pushes around. The real deep down you is the whole universe. To awaken to this truth is to see that you were never an object moving through time. You were time itself unfolding, eternity playing dress-up as a human." At first, this realization feels like madness. The ego protests, terrified of its own transparency. It whispers, "You're disappearing. You're losing yourself." And in a way, it's right. The self that was never real is dissolving. But what remains is not nothingness. It is everythingness. Imagine standing on a cliff at dawn. The horizon begins to glow. For a moment there is no boundary between sky and sea, no line dividing the sun from the self. You are not watching the sunrise, you are the sunrise. That's how awakening feels, like the universe remembering its own light. Watts often laughed when describing this, because the cosmic joke is that the seeker was the sought all along. You spent years chasing meaning only to realize you were the meaning chasing itself. He said, you are the universe experiencing itself, and what you call other people are the other parts of your own body. When this truth first sinks in, a strange compassion arises. You begin to see that every face, even the ones that once hurt you, are masks worn by the same consciousness. The beggar, the tyrant, the lover, the fool, all are you in different disguises, playing the eternal game of forgetting and remembering. But to truly live from this awareness requires something even deeper than realization. It requires trust. Trust that the same intelligence moving the stars is breathing through your lungs. Trust that every ending hides a beginning, and that chaos is just another rhythm of the dance. There is a Zen saying, the obstacle is the path. When the mirror breaks, and you feel like life has fallen apart, it is not punishment, it is purification. The breaking was always the point. The story of Siddhartha, before he became the Buddha, mirrors this truth. For years he sought enlightenment through austerity, starving himself, punishing his body, meditating until the brink of death. But one morning, as he sat beside the river, he heard a musician tuning a stringed instrument. One string was too loose, it made no sound. Another was too tight, and it snapped. And suddenly Siddhartha understood. The truth lies in balance. He let go of his striving. He stopped searching, and in that stillness beneath the Bodhi tree the mirror shattered completely, revealing only light. The spiritually awake walk the same path. They stop fighting the dream, stop condemning their humanness, and simply allow. They cry when pain comes. They laugh when joy returns. They do not cling to heaven nor fear hell. For them, both are expressions of the same divine play. Watts once remarked, to have faith is to trust yourself to the water. When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water because if you do, you'll sink. Instead, you relax and float. The shattering of the mirror is the moment you stop grabbing. You let the current carry you, and in that surrender you discover you were the current all along. But the story does not end with dissolution. Because even light, once freed from the mirror, must learn to dance again within form. And that dance between life and death, self and surrender, is the rhythm of eternity itself. The final stage of the shattering is subtle, almost imperceptible. It is not announced with fireworks or proclamations, but with a quiet breath that rises from the depths of being. You notice it in the way the sunlight filters through leaves, in the scent of earth after rain, in the laughter of a child that is no longer someone else's. Everything feels intimate, alive, connected. You begin to live in moments rather than in stories. You no longer measure life against expectations or comparisons. The past is a shadow, the future a mist. Only the now, the ceaseless, luminous nows remains. Watts described this as the realization that the self is a wave in the ocean. When the wave rises, it feels separate. When it falls, it feels alone. But the ocean never ceases. You are the wave and in the ocean. You are both birth and dissolution, both question and answer. Stories of awakening across cultures speak of this same realization. A mystic in the deserts of Egypt described lying beneath the stars and feeling the universe pulse through his veins. A monk in Japan spoke of tears streaming down his face as he realized the wind, the birds, and his own heartbeat were not separate. In each the mirror shattered, and yet what was revealed was not nothing but the infinite. And still the world moves around you, unaware. Traffic roars, machines hum, people argue and love, fight and forgive, but you are no longer lost in it. You are present in it, fully awake, fully alive, and fully aware that you have always been part of the story you once thought was outside you. The shattering of the mirror is not an endpoint. It is a doorway, a crack through which the infinite shines into the human form. From here one can choose to remain in the old patterns of fear and illusion, or to step boldly into the dance of life and death, knowing that both are expressions of the same eternal truth. And as the mirror lies broken, light floods the room. A final reminder: nothing was ever missing. The question remains, once the mirror is gone, once the illusion of the self dissolves, what is left to do in the world of form? It is in that question that the next chapter begins. The world whispers in rhythms. The tide rises and falls. Leaves tremble in the wind. Flames consume the wood, only to leave ashes that nourish the soil. Life and death are inseparable, intertwined in a choreography older than memory, more precise than clocks. Yet humanity resists this dance. We fight death, mourn loss, and fear the passage of time as if it were an enemy rather than a partner. Alan Watts often said, "Life and death are not two. They are two aspects of the same event." And yet for most the idea is terrifying. Death appears as an abrupt end, a final curtain, a disappearance into nothing. Life appears as something to cling to protect, to hoard. The spiritually awake see something different. Both are the same music and both are meant to be danced with. Consider a single tree in autumn. Its leaves flame red, gold, and orange. The branches shake with wind. Slowly, leaf by leaf, they fall, carpeting the earth below. From the perspective of the ego, this is loss. The tree is diminished. But from the perspective of awareness, this is creation. Each fallen leaf nourishes the soil, feeds the insects, shapes the cycles of coming seasons. Death becomes the seed of life. The spiritually awake learn to move in this rhythm. They do not cling, yet they do not withdraw. Every moment is embraced. Every ending is a beginning. They witness life and death as two dancers spinning, each mirroring the other, inseparable and beautiful. There was a philosopher who wrote letters to his friends as he neared the end of his life. He described the world in ways that seemed almost mystical. "I no longer fear the end. Every breath I take is both life and death. To inhale is to be born. To exhale is to surrender. I am learning the dance." Watts would smile at such words, for he taught the same truth. To resist the flow of life is to suffer. To embrace it in all its pain and beauty is freedom. Yet most people ignore the rhythm. They separate themselves from death, fearing its inevitability. They forget that life itself is impermanent, that every heartbeat, every laughter, every tear is a fleeting flame. And because they resist this truth, suffering accumulates. The spiritually awake, however, recognize impermanence not as cruelty, but as grace. They see that endings are not punishment. They are transformation. The birth of a child, the passing of a star, the decay of a building. All are notes in the same eternal song. And so, in this awareness, fear begins to dissolve. To truly embrace life and death as a dance requires courage. The courage to watch, to feel, to surrender without clinging. Imagine a man standing beside the bedside of a dying friend. His heart races. He wants to hold, to prevent the inevitable, to demand that life continue. Yet the spiritually awake see differently. They see the friend not as lost, but as transitioning, moving from one form to another like a river flowing into the sea. The tears are still present, but they are tears of love, not fear. Each heartbeat is celebrated. Each breath is sacred. Watts said, "You do not understand life until you understand death, and you do not understand death until you understand life." This is not abstraction. It is lived experience. It is the sight of a mother letting go of a child learning to walk, knowing she must allow the fall to understand balance. It is the recognition that every ending contains its own beginning, every grief its own gift. In many traditions, death is called the great teacher, and it teaches without cruelty, without condemnation. It teaches by being inevitable, by demanding presence. The spiritually awake listen to its lessons. They watch their own lives as a river, noticing where the water ripples, where it stills, where it crashes upon rocks, and they float with it, not against it. There is a story of a sage in India who spent days meditating in a cave beside a river. He watched the water pass endlessly, never the same twice, never stopping. One day a student asked him, "How can I find peace when everything changes?" The sage dipped his hand into the current and let the water flow through his fingers. "Because," and he said, "the river is not afraid to lose itself. Neither should you. This is the essence of the dance. Life is a constant giving and receiving. Death is not an enemy. It is a partner, guiding, shaping, reminding. The spiritually awake understand that to resist death is to resist life itself. To cling is to suffer. To surrender is to move freely." Watts often warned that people make two grave mistakes. They either cling to life as if it were permanent, or they fear death as if it were annihilation. Both are born from the same ignorance. In truth, one cannot exist without the other. The flame that burns brightest knows that it will one day flicker, and in that knowledge there is beauty. Because the temporality of life does not diminish its richness, it enhances it. Every moment becomes more vivid, every relationship more precious, every breath more miraculous. Awareness sharpens the senses, deepens empathy, and awakens gratitude. Even pain transforms in this understanding. Illness, suffering, heartbreak. They are no longer enemies, but teachers in the dance. A man who once feared death now feels its rhythm and bows with it. A woman who mourns learns that sorrow is as fleeting as joy, both melting into the same river of being. The spiritually awake move with life, not against it. They see birth and death as partners in a cosmic choreography, inseparable and eternal. They feel time not as a cage, but as a wave, carrying them forward, carrying everyone forward toward the unknown, toward everything. And yet, even with this wisdom, the human heart trembles. Because the dance is not predictable, not safe. Every step could lead to pain, to loss, to dissolution. Yet the spiritually awake do not falter. They step, they move, they sway, knowing that fear is part of the rhythm, not a reason to stop. The final stage of this dance is acceptance, not passive, but fully alive. The spiritually awake move through the world knowing that every encounter, every experience, every heartbeat is temporary, yet they embrace it completely. They laugh, they cry, they touch, they speak, fully aware that all forms are fleeting and all forms are sacred. Alan Watts often illustrated this with music. A song rises, reaches a crescendo, and falls silent. If you resist the ending, you suffer. If you understand that the silence is part of the music, joy and sorrow flow together. Life and death, love and loss, beginning and ending, all notes in the same eternal symphony. In the quiet of a mountain temple, an old monk watches the sunrise. A leaf falls from the tree beside him, landing softly on the stone floor. He smiles, knowing the leaf's journey is both ending and beginning. He does not cling. He does not resist. He moves with the rhythm of the world, and in that movement he finds peace. The spiritually awake learn that death is not to be feared, because it is merely transformation. They understand that life itself is impermanent, and in impermanence lies freedom. Every breath, every heartbeat, every fleeting moment becomes a meditation, a dance, a celebration of being. Watts reminded us, when we have grasped that we are not separate from the flow of life, the fear of death vanishes. We are not extinguished. We are simply moving with the rhythm of existence. And so the dance continues. Life rises, death follows, yet both are embraced, inseparable, beautiful. The spiritually awake do not resist the music. They flow with it, aware that the universe moves through them, that each step is both fleeting and eternal, both personal and universal. But even in this embrace, one question lingers at the edge of awareness. If life and death are one, if the self is an illusion, what is left to do in the world of form? That question, shimmering, open, and infinite, is where the next chapter begins. Awakening the spiritually awake learn is not a retreat from the world. It is a return. Not a return to the same old patterns, the same old fears, the same old illusions, but a return to the ordinary, seen through extraordinary eyes. The streets, the faces, the rain on rooftops, the scent of bread from a nearby bakery, all shimmer with clarity. Life, once veiled, is no longer taken for granted. Alan Watts described this as the paradox of enlightenment. You cannot get off the carousel, but you can finally enjoy the ride. And what a ride it is. Every movement of the body, every thought, every breath carries the resonance of infinity. Even the most mundane tasks, washing dishes, walking to the market, greeting a neighbor, are imbued with profound significance. Because the spiritually awake understand one thing: reality has never been small. They themselves have always been part of the vast unfolding. In a village in southern India, an old woman rises before dawn to fetch water. To anyone else, her day is routine, repetitive, ordinary. To the awakened, she is a priestess of being. Each step is a ritual, each motion of her hands a prayer. The water she carries is not just liquid, but life itself, reflecting the first light, the clouds, the earth. This return is not free of struggle. The ordinary world remains with its chaos, suffering, and loss. Yet the awakened move differently within it. They do not fight the tide. They do not resist the storms of emotion or circumstance. They meet life fully, openly, without illusion or fear. Watts often reminded his students that to be awake in the ordinary world is the highest art. He said, "The point of life is to be completely involved with what you are doing here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize it is play." The spiritually awake treat even grief, even heartbreak as part of this play. When sorrow comes, they feel it deeply, but they do not lose themselves to it. When joy comes, they embrace it fully, knowing it is as transient as a breeze. The ordinary world becomes a canvas upon which the infinite paints itself, not in grandeur or spectacle, but in subtle textures, patterns, and rhythms. Every face is a mirror, every conversation a reflection, every encounter an opportunity for presence. The awakened walk among people, yet they are not of them in the ordinary sense. They see beyond surface identities, beyond the egoic masks, to the same divine play manifesting in every human form. To return to the ordinary is not to simplify life. It is to live it fully. The return to the ordinary is also a return to responsibility, not in the sense of duty imposed by society, but in the understanding that every action, however small, ripples through the cosmos. A kind word, a shared smile, a gesture of patience, each becomes a thread in the infinite web of being. The spiritually awake act with awareness, not obligation. Alan Watts often described this as living without separation. He said, "You are the universe, expressing itself as a human for a little while. Why waste the opportunity?" And so they do not wait for extraordinary circumstances to live fully. They touch the lives of those around them, not to control or fix, but simply to participate in the eternal dance. The act itself is sacred regardless of outcome. Consider a young teacher in a crowded city school. For years he focused on tests, rules, and results. Then after a period of inner awakening, he returned to the classroom with a new vision. Each child, each question, each struggle became a portal to presence. He no longer measured success in grades, but in connection. Every lesson was infused with life, and every moment became an opportunity for wonder. The ordinary world, once mundane, is now miraculous. The street corner where children play, the noise of traffic, the scent of wet pavement, all pulse with vibrancy. The awakened inhabit this world fully, aware of its impermanence, aware that every breath is both a beginning and an ending. Yet this return is not passive. The spiritually awake do not escape life's challenges. They face loss, betrayal, failure, but with a depth of awareness that transforms suffering. They do not cling to outcomes. They understand that pain and joy, success and failure, love and grief, are threads of the same tapestry. Watts would often illustrate this with the metaphor of surfing. The awakened ride the waves of life without trying to control them. They fall, they rise, they move with the current. The wave itself carries them, and in surrender they find freedom. Even death, once terrifying, becomes a teacher in the ordinary world. The spiritually awake live as if every day might be their last, not in anxiety but in presence. They embrace relationships fully, express love completely, and attend to every moment with reverence. There is a story of a farmer in rural Japan. For decades he worked the land with ordinary diligence. One day he suddenly perceived the cycles of growth and decay with a clarity that transformed his life. Every seed planted, every harvest gathered, every rainstorm observed became a meditation. He laughed and wept in the same moment, aware that life and death were inseparable, and that every ordinary act was part of the infinite dance. The spiritually awake, returning to ordinary life, are not removed from reality. They are more deeply immersed in it than ever before. They move among crowds, they speak with strangers. They handle mundane tasks, yet each gesture, each word, each breath is fully alive. This is the final stage of awakening. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the extraordinary is no longer necessary. One no longer seeks, one simply lives. The return to the ordinary is also a return to responsibility, not in the sense of duty imposed by society, but in the understanding that every action, however small, ripples through the cosmos. A kind word, a shared smile, a gesture of patience, each becomes a thread in the infinite web of being. The spiritually awake act with awareness, not obligation. Alan Watts often described this as living without separation. He said, "You are the universe, expressing itself as a human for a little while. Why waste the opportunity?" and so they do not wait for extraordinary circumstances to live fully. They touch the lives of those around them, not to control or fix, but simply to participate in the eternal dance. The act itself is sacred regardless of outcome. Consider a young teacher in a crowded city school. For years he focused on tests, rules, and results. Then after a period of inner awakening, he returned to the classroom with a new vision. Each child, each question, each struggle became a portal to presence. He no longer measured success in grades, but in connection. Every lesson was infused with life, and every moment became an opportunity for wonder. The ordinary world, once mundane, is now miraculous. The street corner where children play, the noise of traffic, the scent of wet pavement, all pulse with vibrancy. The awakened inhabit this world fully, aware of its impermanence, aware that every breath is both a beginning and an ending. Yet this return is not passive. The spiritually awake do not escape life's challenges. They face loss, betrayal, failure, but with a depth of awareness that transforms suffering. They do not cling to outcomes. They understand that pain and joy, success and failure, love and grief, are threads of the same tapestry. Watts would often illustrate this with the metaphor of surfing. The awakened ride the waves of life without trying to control them. They fall, they rise, they move with the current. The wave itself carries them, and in surrender they find freedom. Even death, once terrifying, becomes a teacher in the ordinary world. The spiritually awake live as if every day might be their last, not in anxiety but in presence. They embrace relationships fully, express love completely, and attend to every moment with reverence. There is a story of a farmer in rural Japan. For decades he worked the land with ordinary diligence. One day he suddenly perceived the cycles of growth and decay with a clarity that transformed his life. Every seed planted, every harvest gathered, every rainstorm observed became a meditation. He laughed and wept in the same moment, aware that life and death were inseparable, and that every ordinary act was part of the infinite dance. The spiritually awake, returning to ordinary life, are not removed from reality. They are more deeply immersed in it than ever before. They move among crowds, they speak with strangers. They handle mundane tasks, yet each gesture, each word, each breath is fully alive. This is the final stage of awakening. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the extraordinary is no longer necessary. One no longer seeks, one simply lives. The culmination of the return to the ordinary is effortless presence. The spiritually awake no longer struggle against the world, nor against themselves. They wake each day with awareness, participate in life fully, and rest at night without clinging. Every act, washing a cup, walking in the park, listening to a friend, becomes a meditation, a sacred expression of existence itself. Alan Watts described this as the art of living. You are a function of what the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is a function of what the whole ocean is doing. To the awakened, the ordinary is not small. A glance, a sigh, a footstep, each contains infinity. The mundane is a stage for the divine play. There is no need to seek spectacular experiences. The richness of existence is already present, awaiting notice. Consider a woman sitting at a cafe watching rain drip from the eaves. In the ordinary world, she waits impatiently for her latte. In awakened perception, the droplets become prisms refracting light, sound, and life. The aroma of coffee is not a routine, it is a gift. The world hums with the pulse of the eternal, and she participates without effort or expectation. Yet the world around her remains unchanged. People rush, argue, ignore. Life continues in its chaos. The difference is not external. It is internal. The spiritually awake inhabit the same streets, the same offices, the same homes, but with eyes that see beyond illusion, with hearts that embrace both joy and sorrow, with minds that flow with the rhythm of life rather than against it. Watts often emphasized that enlightenment is not an escape from humanity. It is a deeper engagement with it. The ordinary life, with all its imperfections, is the final frontier. The awakened understand that love, compassion, creativity, and presence are not abstract ideals. They are lived here and now, in the simplest acts. In this way, the return to the ordinary is a circle completed. The journey began with a questioning of self, passed through the shattering of illusions, danced with life and death, and finally arrives in the ordinary, fully awake, fully human, fully divine. And as they move through this ordinary world, the spiritually awake carry a secret smile. They know what others forget, that the universe has always been unfolding through them, that every heartbeat is sacred, every breath a miracle. Life is not something to be conquered, but a dance to be joined in rhythm with eternity itself. The ordinary has never been ordinary. It has always been extraordinary. The rain falls, the sun rises, children laugh in the streets, lovers embrace, strangers pass by without knowing the infinite unfolding beneath their feet. Yet for those who awaken, every moment is a universe, fleeting, radiant, eternal. The mirror has shattered, the dance continues, and the ordinary world glows with the light that has always been there, waiting for eyes willing to see.